Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be painting an abstract or very loose style scenery using mixed media but mainly gouache. I recently found an artist on Instagram. Her handle is at hannahflanagan_art and she does these really expressive and yet very whimsical paintings with a lot of textures and loose strokes. I believe she used gouache as her base and she adds textures on top using soft pastels, colored pencils, and oil pastels. This one in particular caught my attention. I just love how loose everything is and it's just so fun to look at the colors and textures in harmony with each other. I also feel like this will be a good opportunity for me to practice to paint loosely since you guys know that I'm not very good at that department. So for today's painting, I really want to try using this technique to apply to this picture that I found. I feel like this will work great with the abstract and loose style, but I'll just be using gouache and oil pastels for this one. So let's go straight to the colors. I'll be using my Himi gouache. Firstly, we have white, rose, sky blue, burnt umber, grass green, medium yellow, and lemon yellow. As for the oil pastels, I'll be using this brand by Greebel, and the colors are emerald green, light olive, light purple violet, lemon yellow, pale yellow, salmon, and I'll also be using white. For this composition, I feel like I need a larger surface area than what I'm used to, so this paper is 9 inches by 6 inches wide, and I'm just going to begin by masking off the sides. I'm going to start by painting the sky, so I just want to have my colors ready. I have a lot of white here, and I just put it on the sides. I also added a little bit of water so it doesn't dry too quickly. And I'm also going to have a little bit of sky blue, tiny bit of burnt umber, and also medium yellow. Since you can see that there's already a bit of the rose on my large palette, I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber and sky blue. I'm using a very thin consistency here. As you can see, it's very watery. And the color that I'm going for is this really light, muted pastel purple that I'm going to place for the top part of the sky. Moving downwards, I'm going to add more rose into this, and to warm up the pink, I also added a little bit of that medium yellow. This time, I'm also going to add some white to turn this into a soft pastel. I'm using a medium to light load, and as you can see, I'm just trying to spread the paint really quickly. I also don't care about the streaks. If anything, I'm actually looking for that uneven surface, so it's okay to add a little bit of water in between to intentionally create the streaky texture. At this point, I wasn't sure how low I want to take down the pink, so I'm just going to work on the top again using the same color mixture, and this time I'm going to mix a little bit of that purple into the pink and try to somewhat blend the color while still maintaining the streaky texture. For the pink and the purple to blend a little bit better, I decided to use more of the rose and white, and then I gradually added more medium yellow into the ratio as I get to the bottom of the sky. So the top part is a little bit cooler and it gets warmer as I get to the bottom. So I'm just going to basically add more layers of paint to keep the streakiness and also to create the gradual blend while still keeping the texture. By the way, to paint the sky, I'm using my Filbert brush, but you can also use a flat brush so you can cover more area as you're painting the large space. To create a softer blend, sometimes I like to use a really thin consistency of the purple and try to bring it downwards so you can still see a little bit of the pink peeking through. This is where I decided I'll just bring the pink downwards to fill the rest of the page, but I'm not too worried about the thickness of the paint. I'm just going to use this as an underpainting. feel like my paper was quite wet here, so I'm just going to dry it off really quickly before adding on more paint. Now this is where I intentionally added more of the streakiness. As you can see, I'm trying to direct my brush in all sorts of places, and I'm also not mixing my paint completely, so each stroke that I make is made out of several colors. Since I ran out of yellow, I'm just going to add a little bit more on my palette. I'm also going to add some grass green for the grass area later on. I'm making really random brush strokes here. As you can see, I'm just making circles and some wiggly lines. This is to create more of a movement and also fluidity to the texture of the sky. Next, I'm going to mix up the green. I'm going to create a few tones. I first use grass green with medium yellow and white, but as you can see, I'm not mixing everything completely. On the side, I'm also going to add a little bit of that sky blue. So some of the green is more pastel and cooler. The others are a little bit more of a yellow green with a pastel tone, and of course this green that I'm using here has less white in the mix, so it's more saturated. At this point, I'm just looking at the reference image, and if I see a certain area with more of a yellow-green, I just place it like what I'm doing here on the right-hand side. And for the right, you can see more of a darker green. For this, I'm just going to add a bit of burnt umber and sky blue to the grass green. And I'm just going to roughly place it where I see it's supposed to be placed according to the reference image. Here I realized that I've taken the greens a little bit too far up in the composition, so I'm just going to erase it by painting on more of the pink on top of the green. I'm just going to roughly do this to indicate where I want the greens to stop, but I'm not going to clean it in any way. After that, I'm just going to continue on to paint more of the textures. This time I'm painting diagonally for the flowery hill in front. When I'm painting this, as you can see, I still have a little bit of the green on my brush, but that's completely fine. In fact, it'll just add to the texture. On the left side of this hill, you can see from the reference image, the color is a little bit more muted and pastel. So I'm just going to add a little bit more as the base color and then build up the details using the more saturated colors. On the left side of the flowery hill in front, the green is a little bit more yellowish, and on the right hand side is a little bit more pinkish. So I'm just going to add more of the light yellow green on the left side and slowly build up the shape or the curve of this hill as well. For the flowers on the right hand side, I'm going to use the same pink as the sky, and I'm still placing it very loosely here. I'm just going to place it to indicate the spacing for now. Since I've covered most of the base color using my large filbert brush, I'm going to switch to my size 2 brush, and this is a round brush, so I can add on smaller textures. If you look really closely at the reference image, there are some bright pink flowers that's very close to the foreground. So here I'm just going to sort of mute the rose color with a bit of burnt umber and also added a little bit of white so it doesn't stand out too much against all the other pastel colors. I'm just painting on short diagonal lines to indicate some of those flowers. Here I've added a lot of white to the pink, and I'm just painting on very small diagonal lines as well as dots on the right hand side. I felt like I needed to lower the value so it's a little bit lighter against the darker green of the hill behind it. Next, I'm going to paint the flowers in front of the flowery hill, and because it's closer to us, we can see a bit more of the shape. I'm going to start using a dark value green from a mix of grass green and burnt umber. I'm going to paint on very thin lines for the stem, still directed diagonally, and also some leaves. To paint the leaves, I tried to put a lot of brush pressure while playing around with the angle, and I tried to place this surrounding the stem. As you can see, I'm also not thoroughly mixing the paint, so some of the leaves are a bit more darker and more brown, whereas some are a bit more saturated with the green. Here I'm using the same green mixture, but it has more grass green in the ratio, and I'm trying to create more of a fine edge for the pink flowers, while also using the same green to paint some of the darker parts of the hill behind. There's a long line of really saturated green, and for this I'm just going to use grass green as is, while leaving out a little bit of the lighter yellow green at the back. On the left side of the hill, I decided to add some shadows using the same mixture as before, but with less white and a little bit more burnt umber and sky blue in the ratio. I just basically painted on streaks following the cross contour lines to add more movement. Moving back to the flowery hill, I feel like I need to add more detail to the green areas, so here I'm just painting thinner diagonal lines using the light yellow-green mix. Next, I'm going to paint the trees in the background. For this, I'm going to use a very thick consistency of burnt umber with a grass green, and just like before, I'm not going to mix it completely. I tried to wiggle my brush and dot using my brush to create the uneven edges, and for the larger trees I'm doing the same thing to create those edges, and then I just fill in the space. On the right hand side, I decided to add a little bit of yellow to the green just to add a little bit more texture and highlight. Since the trees at the back are even smaller, I decided to use a fairly dry brush load, so it's much easier to control the amount of paint on my brush, and it's also easier to get really sharp edges. For the left side of the tree, I felt like it was looking a little bit too flat with the dark colors, so I decided to add a little bit of highlights using a mix of grass green and medium yellow. Next, I'm adding more medium yellow on my palette here, and I added a little bit of grass green. I'm going to use this yellow green to paint the sunspots, or where the sun is hitting the hills, according to the reference image. I feel like a bit of the pink sky is also reflected on the light, so I'm going to also add some pink. I decided to lighten the hill on the background, and for this, after painting on the lighter orange color, I decided to go back using the dark green to repaint the edges of the trees. Here I'm just going to add a little bit more depth and detail by introducing different colors to the flowery hill. As you can see at this point, I'm focusing more on the textures, so most of the time I'm painting with a dry brush consistency, so my brush strokes are more textured. After adding more textures to the hills and the flowers, I decided to lighten the value further for the flowery hill. So here I'm adding more white, and I'm painting on diagonal lines as well as dots for extra textures. I feel like a bit of the hill should be showing more here, so I decided to just go over it using the same green mixture as before and just covering some of the flowers which are a bit too tall. Next, I'm going to paint some flowers in the foreground. For this, I'm actually going to paint the petals, and I use a mix of the tiniest bit of sky blue with a lot of white. I'm just using the tip of my brush here, even though my brush sort of flattened, and I'm trying to paint on 4 to 5 petal flowers as well as some dots for some smaller flowers. Next, I'm going to paint the moon. I didn't realize that my camera wasn't recording this, but I basically drew out the tiny circle with my pencil, and I used that as an outline. To add a bit of dimension to the moon, I used the peachy mix from the sky, but with more medium yellow and a lot of white, so it's very light. And on the right hand side, I used just white. I also like to layer on a little bit of lemon yellow mixed with white for a bit of change in the tone of yellow. When I dropped my tissue, I didn't realize I spilled some yellow there, so I'm just going to cover it using the same sky color as before. I don't mind this. In fact, it just adds more to the streaks for the sky. And I'm also going to clear out some of the greens again using more of the pink mixture. Going back to the foreground, I decided to add more leaves using the dark green mixture from grass green and burnt umber, since I feel like the white flowers are covering a bit too much of the leaves. So that's basically the painting, but lastly I'm going to add extra textures using my oil pastels. I'm just trying to use the same colors that I used to paint this, and I'm just trying to enhance those textures further. But if you feel like experimenting, you can also try to introduce different colors as well. As for the sky, I'm going to use different colors like white and this really light yellow, some salmon that I'm going to use the side off to create thicker textures, and also some light purple. Adding these textures will not only make the painting look more fun, but I feel like it adds a little bit of movement to the otherwise still sky. Once I'm happy with the amount of textures I've added, I'm just going to unmask and reveal the painting. And that's basically it for this painting. I honestly love this technique and I'd love to explore further for other landscapes or even maybe painting waves with this. I love how this makes me think and paint more loosely by focusing on the colors and shapes instead of the individual elements, and how quick it actually came together. This painting took me only an hour to complete, including filming, and it was so satisfying to paint, so I hope you guys enjoy it as well. Like usual, all the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in my description box. If you guys enjoyed what you see today, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!